Thank you so much for all of your presentations, and you offered so much to think about, interwoven through the different presentations and your work. And I also see through the conversations you've had together, I can see where the threads sort of cross, or I don't know if it's the bobbin thread or the top thread, Justine, but I don't know which kind of stitching is happening. Circular stitching, I imagine. And in the background, actually, if we can have, just as we enter this discussion period, if we want to try for Justine's videos, we can pause when we maybe get them working. We'll see if that can happen in the background as well, so we make sure to see what you prepared for us. But thinking through what you've all shared, I really wanted to spend a minute thinking about how you're theorizing. So you each talked a little bit about how you're coming to consider your work and how it's, in different instances, it's informed differently through, and you mentioned things like the land itself, home, dreaming, materiality, and the way that this connects back to the land. And so I'm wondering if each of you can touch a little bit, not just on theory used in your work, but actually particularly where you are arriving at theory. Like, how is it, you also, of course, have citations from different, authors' experiences, but also talk about family, also talk about ecologies on the land. And so I'm wondering if you each would reflect a bit on how some of the theorizing that you're doing in your work, where it's coming from for you. We don't have to go in order. You can, as you think about it and want to respond.
Okay, I'll go first. It's kind of a big question for me, just mostly because I've really been out of the academic brain for a long time.
Yeah, and you can stay out of it too. You can talk about theory coming from we had a visit yesterday and did that's what I'm also interested in is there are academic backgrounds that you are part of, but also very much in terms of when you're taking the work out to the land, when you're visiting with family, those kinds of other equally important threads of where theory is coming from.
Okay, totally. Thank you. That was actually really helpful. I think to answer that, I'll kind of return to that, Diné philosophical matrix of Sant Nagai Begat Hachon, because I do use that to theorize in my work, and I also think that I kind of use a lot of knowledges that have been kind of articulated and uncovered in the realm of Indigenous futurisms as also a grounding for my theorizing. But when I think about Sant Nagai Begat Hachon, I'll just say SNBH for short. It's what we usually say anyway. So SNBH, when I think about theorizing, especially in my master's, I really was pushing back against including white academics at all in my work. I really wanted to center Diné knowledge systems and my family histories and stories and the way that we see the world as a way of creating the artwork. So I really did that, and SNBH was kind of where I always kind of came back to and started from, because it's so rich. There's just so much thinking that can come out of this matrix of viewing the world. And a lot of the things I was thinking about, I said SNBH is how to live as a Diné person. So when I think about that, I'm thinking about, okay, how is my body moving in space? How am I relating to my home territories and honoring my relationship with my home territories? Especially being away from there and creating work away from there. For me, I really like had to be grounded and constantly like returning to and going back and bringing the work back and making sure that like I kind of always had this tether that was kind of keeping me grounded. And I think SNBH is kind of a way that I was able to have that tether when I wasn't actually on the land, and wasn't actually surrounded by like my elders and my aunties and uncles, because you know, I needed something to guide me, and this like beautiful kind of matrix, SNBH, kind of was that guide for me. So I think I really kind of looked at Navajo thinking and theory to theorize, so really centering my family's like traditional knowledges in that way. I'll stop there. I won't talk about the Indigenous futurisms kind of theorizing yet, but yeah.
I think for me, because I come from a making background, first and foremost, I kind of fell into academia. And so I think for me, it's through the making that actually helps me to theorize my work. And so I tend to kind of, I've been thinking a lot, and I was actually kind of working through this question with a dear friend and colleague of mine, Susan Blight. But how do we like, how do we cite materially? Like how does our making methods become a part of that citation process? And then how does that then help us to theorize our work when it comes to creating and thinking through our making process? And I think like this is something that I'm still trying to understand, and something that I'm kind of teasing out a little bit more, especially when it comes to my dissertation, because I feel very fortunate to be in a practice-based PhD program. So I have my written dissertation, but the actual dissertation itself is physical material work. And so I think it's been a really beautiful way for me to be able to move through academia, and know that my making is something that is incredibly rich in theory already, and it's really just about putting the language to that. And so I think for me, it's really looking back at the knowledge that, say, my mom passed down to me, different stitching techniques, different ways of making that then I'm able to use within my work. And a part of naming that process is a part of then being able to cite and create citation in material form, because that's found just inherently within my work. And I think too, when I'm kind of, moving through this idea and this theory of restitching, to me it's not only something that's theoretical, but it's also something that is deeply embodied. And so I think for me, because a lot of that understanding and that thinking is coming from the material first, it is already inherently embodied. And so I think again about, theorizing as maybe a little bit more expansive than, what I maybe originally thought. Because I think when I first moved into academia and I started graduate school, theory really scared me. And I think a lot of artists, it's intimidating. But I think that if we look towards theory from a different angle, all about the angle.
The good angle.
The good angles. Sorry, that was an inside joke between the three of us. But if we look at theory maybe from a different angle, and we look at the, our making and the theory that is present in that, I think that it allows us to actually look at the world in new and different ways. And I think that that's something that I really value and I really love about research creation and practice-based research, which is a whole nother conversation. And it's, I think, a super exciting time for that right now too. So yeah, that's what I would say.
So awesome! Oh my God. I mean, I like practice. I kind of leaning in heavy in practice, and our mom teaches me so much every day. The hard work of living. That's part of the reason why I'm like, it's hard to have a human body, because I watch her, we all watch her, and we live with her, and how her body's changing and how all of our bodies are changing. It is hard work to have a human body. And so the practice then, I need to find the words, or the English words, to articulate that kind of, how we might be able to understand that theory or that theorizing, Lately I've been thinking about theory as well as like, this is a gift, like this is my gift to you, like this helped me, I'm going to give this to you. And that's what elders did, Like Charlie Pete said to me one time, I'm going to teach you, you like snowshoes, I'm going to teach you how to make snowshoes. And then he could, he read me for filth or whatever. It was like, I know Peter's not going to get up at 4 a.m. You got to get up at 4 a.m., I'll meet you at 4 a.m., we'll go out on the bush. And I'm like, I'll maybe next week. But until you practice and you practice and you practice until, and then you rely on this muscle memory idea or these skills that the body develops as your body ages and transforms. But then you have familial Alzheimer's, a genetic marker, which leads to this degenerative disease, and you watch your mom's muscle memory forgetting how to do what it spent a lifetime learning how to do. And so then the theory needs to change also, and it needs to be even more expensive than what we expect it to be. And I do go to I mean, how much do we all love bell hooks? I mean, like the gifts of bell hooks, right? And she offered those things to us, this is what I did. Those earlier books, they got an edge to them, but she's saying, these are the struggles I went through. This is how long it took me to find the English words to describe these troubles. And I'm going to offer them to you so you can have a better lived experience, living experience. That quote, I came to theory because I was hurting. Bell Hooks' quote, I came to theory because I was hurting. It's still so transformative for me. I don't, when I was 24 when I read that, or 23 when I read that, I didn't even know that I was hurting. Every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ways the way that you responded to that just really helps, I think, reposition what theory can be, right? It can be expansive. It can come from practice. It can come from family. It can come from the land. It can come from community. And I wanted to get to, in your presentation, Justine, you talked about the land as the center, and then also, Nicole, in your presentation, you talked about taking the work to the land, but also the figure of Spider-Woman, and Spider-Woman as teacher of weaving to Navajo Dene people. And so I wanted to have you all reflect a bit on, so if we're thinking about those expansive ideas of theory, or what arrives to us when we're making and what we offer to the world, in what ways does the land as an ecology, as a system of knowledge that includes us, in what ways does your practice, is the way that you are working as an artist, connect to the land in this expansive kind of way? Like, I'm thinking of specific examples around your figure of Spider-Woman, but also when you're holding the wood in the garment that you've made, which looks like it's so well considered in terms of the task, you know, of carrying wood. But that task of carrying wood, you know, I think within this there's also a lot of devalued knowledge. And so the knowledge of what kind of wood to burn, you know, how to gather it, you know, these are things that aren't valued as much in, say, an academic context, but they're very important in our lived, embodied experiences. And I think that there's a really important part of Indigenous theory and knowledge that is like you're saying, and for artists, that is exactly what you're saying in terms of that is both in our heads, but also in our bodies, which is then echoed or reflected in the land. And that is a very long statement, but I just want to kind of prompt a response as you kind of consider that in your work.
I think with my master's work, this is a piece on the screen from my master's work. For this work specifically, when I was thinking about the land and also the garments that I was making, the purpose and the intention behind the creation of the four garments in the body of work was really about garments that were going to support my Indigenous body in continuing to engage in certain land-based knowledges that have been passed down to me by my family, and how the garments that I made was going to support me in continuing to practice my identity and my family and my ancestors' identity in relation to our diasporic homeland. And so for me, the images that you see that I've shared, the garments, well, first and foremost, they were all made back home, but then they were also activated back home. And so what I mean by that is the work that I make is not just meant to be made and then, you know, beautiful to look at. It's actually about then wearing the clothes and going and engaging in those practices. So, for example, with the gauntlets, I think I shared a picture of me. It was all about like a story. So I went out on the bay with my dad and my mom and my best friend, and we went ice fishing, and then caught a trout, went back home, and I filleted the fish with the gauntlets on. And the imprint of those experiences live now on the garments. And so as I was filleting the fish with the gauntlets on, they obviously got dirty, but they're meant to, because these pieces are alive. And they're meant to be worn and they're meant to be used. And that's really what I've learned from spending time with ancestor garments and material culture, is that you can see that they were loved and they were used. And so I think for me it was really about, you know, kind of having those moments with the land, and honoring the ways in which the land has held my family, and how we are able to continue our knowledge systems in relation to the land. For my doctoral work, I've kind of pushed it a bit further, and I've really been considering land as creative collaborator. So what does it mean for me to stitch in relation to the land? So kind of considering the land as collaborator through the making process. For my comprehensive examination. One of my exams, I pushed really hard for it to be practice-based, and it was approved, which was awesome. So instead of writing another essay, I got to do something. And I went down to the bay, to the shoreline, and I sat there and I just stitched for hours. It didn't really matter what I was stitching, but it was more me being able to think through this idea of what does it mean to stitch in relation to the land, and for the land to stitch with me. And so I just sat there right at the water's edge, back home, and I just stitched. And that allowed me to further understand what it means to invite land as a collaborator in our work, but also acknowledge the ways in which land has always been a collaborator in my work, but maybe I just didn't notice. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I need to think some more. Nicole just said I need to think some more.
I can do it.
You can go however you want. You can ask me questions.
Well, I do. I hadn't heard you talk about that piece, Nicole, before, being there at that place where the Spider Woman
Yeah.
is the Spider Woman's home.
Yeah.
And it's very interested to also think with you about how it felt on your body and in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it's not similar, it's not the same thing, but
Yeah.
I do have an aligned experience where I was helping my older sister Kathleen with an on-the-land literacy camp. There is a specific story of our people called Three Sisters. It's always called Three Sisters, you know? Anyway, because there's only one sister, and there's like 4 brothers. But, you know, math is hard for some folks.
It's hard for us. And also we have about 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah, thank you. But I know the story. I was told the story by old school elders and on the land literacy camp. We went to the actual place where the 3 sisters. The story is part of the story is it's a Transformer story. Boulders in the river became the characters, they were transformed. And I'm there telling the story to kids who know the story better than me because they're from the community and they're testing me. And I'm there right there where the sister and the 3 brothers turned to stone, telling the story to kids. Yeah. So it was quite intense. Yeah, so I was also just curious about your experience as well.
Yeah. It was really powerful, actually, to do that. I, again, got my family to come with me and drive me all the way out there. It was about 6 hours from where I was living. I was living in Santa Fe at the time, and Spider Woman lives in Canyon de Chelly, so that's where we went. And yeah, what was so interesting was in my approach to it, me and my mom talked a lot about it because Spider-Woman is so she's so important, and you have to be respectful of her and of her home and the way you do things around her. And we have a lot of teachings that relate to Spider-Woman and the knowledge that she shared with us, and when we can tell her stories and when we can't. So we talked about it as we were going out there, and me and my mom, we decided we had to, do a corn pollen prayer and introduce ourselves to Spider-Woman, let her know what we were doing, why we were there, and let her know what our intention and purpose was. So we had this almost conversation with her before we did anything. And we all dressed up in our traditional ceremonial clothing because that felt like the right way to go see her. And it's kind of weird because it's now it's, you know, tourists go to see Spider Rock. So there were like tourists around, but they were like kind of far off on the trail, but like they kind of were doing that thing where they're like trying to photograph you and you're like, no, 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 no. So we had my dad on like duty to like protect us, really, in the work we were doing. But I really do like think about like specific locations as like a really important kind of way to collaborate with the land. It's not just about like, for me, it's like not necessarily just about like using different like materials for the land in a more general sense. I like this, I'm really attracted toward like the specificity of like where these stories come from. And then going to those stories, because I really started thinking like the stories are in the land, like actually physically in the land. And the land is holding those stories, just like you said, Peter. And so like, how do you go visit with those stories? That's what the whole project was. Yeah, it's like, how do you do that in a respectful way that is really guided by like Diné teachings? And like, what's so cool is all those teachings come from the land. So like, it's like, you know, the whole structure of my project was based around the sacred mountains, even as a philosophical matrix, and it's also the way I did the whole thing. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. But
yeah, no, I mean, I'm wanting to get into this idea, and I think we've shared it here today, and sort of to make the space of kind of stitching the end of the circle to itself. I think it's like what you're sharing is really about how our teachers can also be non-human. They can be material. When we're in the right space to pay attention, to receive, those can be through community, culture, family, land, and we need to make space in institutions, in academic practice, to be able to acknowledge those forms of knowledge that have been suppressed, oppressed, devalued, erased, and that there's a real power, as we see in your work, in doing that, in citing the land, in collaborating with the land, in thinking through an ecology of practice. And in other fields you might refer to environmental approaches or different kinds of ways of operating. But here we see it as embedded through culture and practice, really, in your work. As we kind of conclude the space today, I also want to give you a few minutes to discuss the kinds of troubles you might be making. Folks have a collective approach to thinking through artists that take risks. And I think even when we're talking about repositioning theory and citing devalued knowledge, there are risks as part of that. And I think we see, there's certainly a lot of risk in performance practices as well. And I know that this is some work you've been doing in conversation with each other, is thinking through what it means to make trouble, what it means to take risk as an artist. And I know you also have some gifts. And so I want to invite you to close the space with maybe inviting others into the space of making change. If that is trouble to some, I mean, it's sometimes liberation and justice to others, so that's important.
Well, I'll just go very quickly, and then maybe we all can offer our voices. Sorry, let's all offer our voices together. I get to work with all these incredible folks up here, and Justine and Nicole and I have been talking about, and Tania as well, we've been talking about risk takers and troublemakers in cultural leadership. And we've been dreaming along this process of wanting to get a group of troublemakers together from diverse ancestries, because there's troublemakers in all cultural spaces around the world. We want to learn with each other. We want to honor all the troublemakers. I mean, we got to make some trouble in order to actually make this, right? And like you're saying, sister, is like there is cost on our bodies as well. Anyway, that's me. I guess I am a troublemaker.
Yeah, just to add to that, we've been doing a lot of thinking even while we've been here in the studio space on these giant Post-it notes, kind of teasing out like, what are we even talking about when we talk about troublemakers? You know, I think something that might be helpful, even just sharing with you kind of where we're at when we think about troublemakers, is we started going way back to like, going into like, yeah, we started time traveling. Exactly, thank you. So we time traveled back and we started realizing, you know, troublemakers, it's not a human-centric thing. And I was like, Coyote is like my troublemaker from my home community, and boy, you make a lot of trouble. And exactly, that's the thing though, like Coyote roamed around on, you know, our home territories, in the arroyos, on the mesas, running into all these different animals, and every interaction, you know, he's making trouble and then the world changes, you know? So like, who are those people? Who are those, you know, non-human kin in the world around us that are making trouble and then the world shifts, you know? Because we need a lot of that work to be happening right now, and it is, which is so exciting. So we want to bring some folks together. Yeah, and we have some troublemaker stickers. Please come up and get one or two. There's a couple stickers on that little sheet, and they're like waterproof, and you can put them on anything.
And stay tuned, we're going to have some of those conversations next year at the Indigenous Art Intensive. We have funding next year. So I really want to thank you all for everything you offered here, and really also respect that we are individuals, but that we also come from lineages and communities and places that also inform our knowledge and everyone here that we invite into that space and discussion with us. So I would like to invite people again to, as we conclude, get stickers, represent, and think about those who have made a difference and change in your world and what you can do as well. And we'll be back here next Wednesday. So thank you all for a beautiful day. Thank you, Dana.